We stand at one of those junctures in history, I think, at the moment, in the Ukraine-Russian war, one shaped as much by the battlefields as by boardroom negotiations, back-channel deals, and the shifting tides of American duplicity under Donald Trump. The impending Trump-Putin phone call set against Ukraine's retreat from Kursk and the suspension of US intelligence sharing, which I think in so many ways resulted in that retreat, signals not just a military turning point, but an indictment of how global brutality, American betrayal, calculated or casual, has shaped the fate of nations. The Ukrainian retreat from Kursk marks the culmination of a 7-month battle that was, in retrospect, an ambitious gambit with little to gain. The initial incursion into Russia's borderlands in August 2024 was an attempt to create leverage, perhaps as a bargaining chip for future territorial negotiations. However, as Russian counteroffensive steadily regained lost ground, Ukraine found itself overstretched, committing elite brigades to a theatre where strategic objectives were vague and political benefits dubious. Now that with Suja lost and Ukrainian forces withdrawing under fire, I suppose we have to ask, was this withdrawal the inevitable result of Russian military resurgence, or was it hastened by external factors, specifically the sudden fragility of American support? And the timing of Ukraine's Kursk collapse coincides ominously with Trump's decision to suspend intelligence sharing and Musk's attempts to cut the Starlink access, or indeed to share Starlink with Russia. And it moves this coincidence has severely impacted Ukraine's ability to coordinate battlefield maneuvers, and the ostensible reason to create conditions for ceasefire negotiations. But in reality, this reeks of a broader Trumpian playbook, negotiating from a position of forced Ukrainian weakness to secure a deal that suits Russia more than Ukraine. And Trump's rhetoric, particularly his recent remarks about dividing up certain assets between Russia and Ukraine, should ring alarm bells, shouldn't it? His focus on territorial partitioning and control over critical infrastructure, including notably nuclear power plants, suggests that any peace Trump envisages will not be an equitable one, but one that entrenches Russian territorial gains and strips Ukraine of key resources. We've got to a point in the world where power and control is more important than what is right. And this isn't merely diplomatic naivety. It's a deliberate capitulation marked as pragmatism, and Ukraine's loss of Kursk was engineered not just by Russian firepower, but by a Western partner increasingly willing to wield coercion against its own ally. That is called betrayal. A 30-day ceasefire is currently being discussed, with Ukraine reportedly agreeing in principle, but Putin remains non-committal, demanding guarantees that Ukraine will not use the pause to regroup. Ironically, the very thing that Russia has done in the past and clearly intends to do now, because it's got its soldiers poised to enter Ukraine territory along the border. The Kremlin has also signalled its unwillingness to accept NATO peacekeepers on Ukrainian soil, highlighting the deep asymmetry in this process. Russia dictates terms while Ukraine is forced into compliance by the very allies who are meant to support Ukraine. Moreover, there's another critical dimension. What happens when Russian troops, many of them battle-hardened and deeply traumatized, return home? The Kremlin is already bracing for the potential chaos that mass demobilization could trigger, suggesting that Russia itself is far from certain about the long-term stability of any ceasefire. On the morning of the Trump-Putin call, Putin has made a revealing economic move, allowing Western asset managers to offload Russian securities through a US hedge fund. And this is significant. It suggests that Russia anticipates a shift in Western sanctions policies, one that might allow it to re-enter financial markets in exchange for a superficial peace. And the Russian ruble's surge and the rising valuation of Russian stock indicates that markets are already betting on a softening of economic pressure. This, coupled with Trump's broader skepticism towards sanctions, signals a worrying trajectory, one where Western economic leverage is prematurely relinquished, strengthening Russia's hand for the next phase of this conflict. And while Trump conducts unilateral negotiations, Europe is scrambling to form a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine militarily. With over 30 countries potentially contributing troops, this could be a game changer if it materializes. This isn't a short-term process. This is a long-term aim. And the key question remains, can Europe act decisively without Washington's full backing? And if so, will Russia treat a European-led intervention as a legitimate deterrence or merely an invitation to escalate? There are three options now. If Trump and Putin reach a deal, will it truly halt the war or simply lock in Russian gains at Ukraine's expense? With America pulling back, will the UK, France and Germany assume the leadership role, or will strategic paralysis set in? And finally, if Kyiv is forced into a bad deal, which certainly looks to be the case, does that mark the end of its Western-backed war effort, or will it seek new avenues of resistance? Will there really be peace if Russia imposes its will? If Ukraine's retreat from Kursk is the military manifestation of its broader strategic decline, then the looming Trump-Putin deal is its diplomatic equivalent. What we are witnessing is either the culmination of America's casual brutality, casual braggadocio, where it abandons allies when convenient, or its active thuggery, where it enforces surrender through coercion and calculated neglect. It doesn't really matter, really, because history will remember that when Ukraine needed support most, the US, in the person of Trump, played power games, Europe hesitated, and Russia dictated terms. And that, more than any battlefield loss, is the true tragedy of this war.